Start by saying hello, everyone. I'm Adam Farquhar, and I'm head of digital scholarship here at the British Library and director of the Endangered Archives program. And I'm going to be chairing the webinar today. Our topic, so just to make sure that you're on the webinar that we think you're on, is on completing a successful preliminary application for the Endangered Archives program. I'd just like to note to everybody who's online that this is actually the first time we've ever done a webinar like this. I hope it will be one of many, but please bear with us if we have some trouble with the system or with the with using it effectively for the purpose of our discussion today, because this is an area that we're learning as well. And I guess the goal for us today is to make sure that people can do really good, strong applications that are a great fit to the program, and then we can fund wonderful projects that derive from them. And I hope that for all of you, you're here because you're considering or in the process of applying for an EAP grant. The deadline is coming up quite soon, November 19th. So hopefully you're working towards that deadline today. So I really got two topics. The first one is I want to just say a little bit about the program and its objectives. This is probably going to be familiar to all of you, but I thought it might be useful to do a quick run over in case it isn't, and to make sure we have a shared understanding. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at what I observe are some of the key factors behind successful applications. Okay, and then we'll be using most of the time we've got together for a Q&A. So the Endangered Archive program is supported by Arcadia, which is a charitable fund of Elizabeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. And the main goal of the program is to preserve cultural heritage and guarantee open access of the results of the projects that we fund for everyone. We started in 2004, 2005. We've been doing this for a while now, and we're going to run for at least another 7 years. So what do? We work by providing grants on an annual basis, okay? And those grants are for projects to preserve significant vulnerable collections, to create digital surrogates, sometimes relocate the originals to better storage conditions. The British Library receives a copy of everything that's digitized, and we make it available openly online. In addition, typically a digital copy goes to a local archival partner. There are a couple of principles underlying the program. So first of all, the original material stays in the country where it is. We don't relocate materials in that way. Secondly, we're really keen to enhance local capacity, and that's so that there's more likelihood of improving the conditions of the sort of storage and archiving of documentary heritage and making it available on a local basis. Third, we really value the involvement of local archival partners. In fact, the equipment that's provided through the projects will also typically remain in place and not be removed from the country. And lastly, I think a really important aspect of the program is that it's reactive. So we have an open call for applications. That means that we don't go out and say, hey, could you do this? We think this project, this material is important. We wait for you to come to us. And that's resulted in a really unique set of collections and materials. And it reflects a much broader range of perspectives than you would ever be able to find with a kind of a top-down directed program. I guess in short, we are trying to make a substantial contribution to safeguarding the world's endangered archival collections, and we do that by working together with you to execute these projects. We've done about 350 projects. We've supported 350 projects or more in over around 90 countries. This is a rough indication of where those projects have taken place, and you can see the very broad spread around the world. We're particularly interested in vulnerable endangered material. These are just some examples of some of the things that we've seen. Audiovisual recordings, so that magnetic tape decays, it gets sticky, it becomes unplayable. On the right here, we have a lovely newspaper collection from Nicaragua, where you can see it just fragmenting into pieces. On the bottom left here, you can see glass plate negatives, images of native peoples in Argentina. Also a kind of material that we've seen quite a few projects engage with. Archives themselves can be endangered. In addition to the condition of the individual items, they can leave materials exposed to the elements, exposed to pests. Sometimes the threat can come from people in the surrounding political and cultural environment, such as the burned items down on the bottom left here, and sometimes from really broad environmental threats, wildfire, flood, mudslide, earthquake. And before I move to the next part of this discussion, I wanted to say we interpret the phrase archive extremely broadly, okay? So it's really about documentary and cultural heritage. Examples have included a huge range of types of things, books, newspapers, periodicals, ephemera, manuscripts, visual material like photographs, prints, and drawings, film and audio recordings, even rock inscriptions and temple murals. So it is rare that we turn proposals down because the material that they're planning to work with is insufficiently archival in nature. Okay, so now I want to talk just a few minutes about applications in the application process. We use a two-stage application process, preliminary applications and detailed applications. So the preliminary applications are where you have a chance to outline your proposed activity. And one of the most important things we're doing here is assessing the fit to the program requirements. Those are reviewed by an expert team, and a subset of the preliminary applicants are invited to progress to a second round. In stage 2, we ask for detailed applications. This requires you to provide a much more complete description of the project. It's super important at that stage to provide clear evidence that you have the rights and permissions to digitize and make available the material. Those are reviewed and evaluated by an extended team. And a subset of the detailed applications then are awarded projects. So today, our goal is to help you to create strong, clear proposals and successful projects. If you're wondering about what the odds are like, what are the numbers like, typical recent years we've seen, let's say 120 preliminary applications, perhaps 60 are invited to go on to present detailed applications, of which there are about 30 awards in a typical year. So that suggests that your chance is about 1 in 4, but I'll tell you, if you pay attention today, you can definitely up that 1 in 4, because some people are not going to be reading the guidance carefully and paying as close attention, unfortunately, to explaining the fit to the program. This open call is for 3 different types of projects: pilot, major, and area. Pilot projects are fairly small, up to a year, £15,000. Sometimes they'll produce a survey or a better understanding of a collection of material and where it is. Sometimes they'll do complete digitization of smaller projects, quite a range. Major projects, up to 2 years, about £60,000. They are expected to do substantial digitization, and it's really a substantial piece of work. We are also introducing for the first time this year area projects. These are larger, about the size of 3 major projects. These will be the hardest to be awarded and will require substantial proven experience delivering projects at scale. I'll note one way of helping to establish that is through doing prior projects. We often see a pilot project helps to establish a track record and also leads to a major project in the subsequent year. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 key factors. These are the 3 key evaluation areas for projects. The first one is the fit to the program. So this is about endangered material. So is the material you're talking about endangered? Does it have substantial research and cultural value? Does it relate to the right time period, so the pre-modern period? And very importantly, do you have the permission to make it available? There are lots of applications. We see applications every year that are for wonderful projects. They're really worthy. We would love to fund them, but they don't fit the specific criteria that EAP has, okay? So that's one of the things I'm hoping through this call people will be able to avoid. That's doing good work and us saying, oh, this is so wonderful, but it doesn't fit in the scope of our program. So I've listed some things that we don't do, okay? We don't fund projects to digitize well cared for archives, other ways of going about it. We don't look to digitize materials that are readily available elsewhere or are digitized already. We don't do the creation of new content like you might find in an oral history project. We don't digitize modern archives, even if they're highly endangered and have a high research value. That's outside of our scope. And lastly, we only support projects that are digitizing material that can be made openly available for research online. So if you're not doing that, even though it will be a wonderful, wonderful project, it won't be an EAP project. It's not something that we can support. The second key factor is around the project team. So when we're looking at the team, we'll be thinking, is this the team that's going to be able to deliver this project? Do they have the skills, the knowledge, and the experience needed? A thing that's quite interesting, we see it's also important to have the right relationships in place. So if you're proposing to digitize material at a set of privately owned collections, then you're going to have relationships with those collection owners and demonstrate that in the application. We look at their local archival partners, are they on board? Are they writing a letter of support? We look to see whether you have in mind how to establish and assemble a team, because typically one person may not have all of the skills required. You need to assemble a team that brings the full set together. On the right here, I've listed some of the problems that we see that result in unsuccessful applications. This might include not knowing enough about the area. I've heard about it, I've never been there. Maybe that's going to be a high-risk project. Or the material. I mentioned weak relationships with owners, a poor understanding of the research value. We have a lot of people who run successful projects that aren't themselves researchers, but they need to have an understanding of what's valuable and not valuable in the collection. Related to that, we've seen proposals from people who are basically don't have anyone on the team who can read or adequately describe the content they propose to digitize. Those are typically less likely to be successful. Some experience with digitization equipment and processes can be very important, as well as experience handling endangered material. So we've seen some great projects where we had to look at it and say, the team members don't know how to properly handle and treat the material they're planning to work with. And lastly, the project plan is also a key factor. We'll look at it and it doesn't make sense. Do you have the right kind of capacity building in mind? Have you allocated, not too much resource and enough, but enough? We look at some value for money considerations, typically at the later stage, but outliers will be flagged up at the preliminary stage. I think one of the problem areas we've seen are people can be quite optimistic about their assumptions. You know, in week 1, they'll do this, and in week 2 and 3, they'll do this, and everything will go swimmingly. And that can be problematic if the whole project plan looks like that. Illogical sequencing or gaps in the plan, not enough time to recruit and train a team, that can be something that can be a serious problem as well. And I'd like to highlight here also 4 more things that EAP doesn't do. So if you're including them, thinking about including them in their proposal, it's unlikely to enhance your success. So we don't support detailed cataloging. We do fairly light touch cataloging within the projects. We'll do a little bit of treatment of the, supports some treatment of the materials, but largely digitization without full conservation. We don't do building works. If a new facility needs to be built to house an archive, you'll have to look to other sources for that. And often surprising to people who are coming from an academic environment is we don't support, for instance, an international conference to tell people about the results of the project. That can be a wonderful thing, and we encourage people to find resources for that elsewhere, but the Endangered Archive program doesn't. So I'm going to just wrap up with a bit of general advice. First one is read the guidance documents super carefully. If you've got any questions about it, ask us, and of course do that today, but also when you're back home. Make sure you show the fit to the program criteria and address the criteria in a very clear and upfront way. We get a lot of these proposals, so the ones that are clear and concise often get a, it's often easier to understand what people are on about. Please, many people are writing English as a second or a third or a fourth language, so it helps to use short, active sentences, even if that's not quite the natural style from your native language. There is some resource in accounting. Do make sure you check your math. We get a fair number of proposals that don't add them up right. So that's a risk. And I'd say if you don't mind, write your application as if it's for an intelligent alien. So somebody who's coming from a very different environment, a very different context, may have very different assumptions. It's good advice generally for proposal writing. I mentioned this at the top, the book Remote Capture, it's advisable for preliminary applications. I think it's essential reading for detailed applications. It's available free to download, and it's also available pretty inexpensively in print form as well, if you prefer that. Reminder of some key dates. 19th of November, closing date for the submissions. We should be letting people know by the end of December if they're invited to submit a detailed application, and those go in mid-February.